Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. Sorry for the long intro music there. Was having a little trouble getting the good old Facebook to start. Facebook events are being weird lately. But yeah, we got it started. We're here. It's a fine Wednesday morning. It's another fine coffee break chat. I'm your host, James Jackson, he, they pronouns, executive producer, Light Thief Productions. We've got a great show for you today. We're mustn't dwell, no, not today. We can't, not on Liberation Day. Today is April 2nd. For those that don't know, President Trump has declared it Liberation Day. He's going to be having an announcement at 4 p.m. From the White House on a bunch of new tariffs that he wants to install, and so we're waiting with bated breath to see what that does to everyone in the world, and how that affects everything that's going on. We're going to be talking about the Day Project, New York State's budget fight right at the moment, which is an interesting regional story. Foreign aid, and the global climate debate. White supremacy benefits all white people, including the ones with no torches. That's why it survives. Brittany Packnett Cunningham said that quote. She's a commentator on current events and a news reporter. And it's true. It's difficult to eliminate the systemic problems that we face without dismantling the things that make a large portion of the population feel protected. Maybe that's why we keep getting into these debates that aren't really debates. Maybe that's why these things keep coming up as debates. We frame a debate around the budget. We frame a debate around transgender people. We frame a debate around the validity of the diversity, equity, and inclusion. For those of us who live these things, they're not debates. It's a solved question. Then you get into the question of, well, what are we actually debating? But we still persist and we still go on. We still get in these debates. Some people continue the work and continue to do the work well. I think that is true of our guests, the founders of Tribe 12. I'm going to bring them on screen. Welcome to Danielle and Megan. If you would please introduce yourselves, your pronouns, what it is you do. We'll start in the center there with Danielle.
Hello, thanks for having us. My name is Danielle Selber, she, her pronouns, and I work at Tribe 12. So Tribe 12 is a nonprofit organization here in Philadelphia. The mission is to connect people in their 20s and 30s to each other and the Jewish community at large. And my main role at the organization is that I'm our matchmaker. So I do all of our events and connections for people who are looking for love in Philly's Jewish community.
Awesome. Sorry, meant to two up, meant to go three up. Stand by. If you would introduce yourself and what it is you do, Megan, and your pronouns, and a little bit more about Tribe 12.
Great. Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm Rabbi Megan GoldMarche. My pronouns are she and her. I saw you call us the founders, and I really, appreciate that honor, but it's not our honor. We were founded in the late 90s by some really phenomenal humans, Annabelle Rusty Lindy and a group of people working with her. There was a longtime executive director before me, Ross Berkowitz. Danielle joined the team a long time ago. We think maybe 14 years ago, but I've only been here 3 years. So I don't take any founding credit. And I'm the executive director. I'm also a rabbi, so I do a lot of everything as one does as a executive of a small-ish nonprofit, fundraising, working with the board, teaching, building relationships. But I would say my personal sort of professional mission, and I think really related to Tribe 12's mission, is helping young folks be less alone, find meaning, find community, find support, and everything I've been doing in my career, and I think that we do at Tribe 12 is really works towards that.
Awesome. So yeah, I wanted to talk to you guys. In my research on Tribe 12, on what it is you do, I noticed that you have this space for conversations. You have this kind of openness. You're working towards resisting binaries and gatekeeping, and not allowing there to be a debate, like false debate, when there isn't debate. I thought that, I think that that's commendable. How do you avoid that becoming an anchor, a drain on your resources? How do you avoid people introducing kind of these false debates with things that you're trying to be open to and inclusive of?
I can.
Yeah, I
Oh,
think. Oh, we're going to interrupt each other a little.
That's okay.
I think that what we value most at the organization is dialogue, and the idea that speaking across differences is really valuable no matter what those differences are. And so a lot of the spaces that we introduce, a lot of our programmatic responses to the things happening in the world is about creating dialogue between people and learning how to be in spaces with people who disagree with you, learning to challenge your own assumptions or your own beliefs that may be long held. And we try to create that space by heavily facilitating sometimes those environments and bringing in experts who know how to let those kind of conversations happen in a safe and productive way.
when I first got here, we did a survey maybe a couple years ago, sort of breaking down, that the world is intense and scary and overwhelming. I mean, even, James, listening to you list off the news articles that you're going to be discussing, I felt overwhelmed. And so we asked people, do you want Tribe 12 to be a place for you to take action, to be involved in sort of changing the world that we're in? Do you want it to be a place where you can process and feel held, or do you want it to be a place where you can sort of have an escape um, from the world? And we find that most people to come to us more for the escape. So maybe 5% of our programming is geared towards doing something about the broken world. People are doing that, but maybe elsewhere. Maybe 25 to 30% is geared towards really processing dialogue, giving people a space to discuss. And a lot of that also happens one-on-one, as as a rabbi myself and our rabbinic intern, and Danielle, I think, does a lot of this work too, really give people one-on-one space to talk about how they're feeling. And then most of our programs are, and I mean escape in a good way. I don't mean escape like people are avoiding the world. It's that we need a place to feel held and recharged. And I think that goes back to what you were saying at the beginning, James, that whether there is a debate or not, we don't want to be the place for people for that debate most of the time. And it doesn't mean it never comes to us. We can't fully avoid it. People have strong feelings and they share them with us. But we first and foremost want to be a place where people can bring their full selves and be held. And if you don't want to allow everyone who shows up to be their full self and be held, then we're probably not the best community for you.
Right. So maybe I'm expressing the word debate in a slightly different way than it's coming across. The thing that I often find that, and there's a couple of things that this has me thinking. The thing that I often find is that organizations like yours, some will face not necessarily intentional bad actors, but bad actors that will come by and try and trigger a debate around something that's already a solved issue in the majority of, say, your work. So like we'll come by and try and trigger a debate about the validity of being trans, for instance. And will, create the trans question, which, harkens back to, of course, triggering language around Nazism and all kinds of other things. But aside from that, is an inauthentic debate. How do you avoid getting mired in that as an organization? Because I've been president of organizations before where even if it's not something as important as the validity of the life of somebody else, people will come onto the board or come into the meeting and offer these kind of topics that aren't really debatable as a debate. How do you not lose lose energy to that, and still hold the space open for people?
I feel very lucky that I don't think, at least around that particular issue, in the time that I've been here, and I think that shows a lot about the way the world has changed. I do not think anyone is trying to tell us that trans folks don't exist. We may have a conversation with some of our stakeholders who are from a different generation about how they respond to the fact that they are working with someone whose pronouns are not she or he. And so that to me is not a debate. It's a worthwhile educational moment. But I don't feel like and again, I can't take credit because I wasn't the founder, but I think the space Tribe 12's been creating. I mean, Tribe 12 had a LGBTQ interest group in the early 2000s called Spectrum. And so I think I'm not saying there aren't things that are brought up for debate. I would say the biggest debate that sometimes comes up is what it means to signal that we care about justice in a way that doesn't come off as partisan. Our board members often want to make sure that the way we talk about bringing justice to the world doesn't feel exclusive to folks who hold certain politics. But again, I don't think it's brought up as a debate. I think it's brought up as an honest question of, we want to make sure doing good in the world is accessible to everybody. But I know that other folks in other organizations face this, and I feel blessed that we don't really have to spend our energy on debates that would question the existence of folks in our community who are there.
Right. And so the other thing your earlier comment brought up is that while you aren't you aren't specifically trying to do the work of creating change, just your very existence does create change. I think a lot of artists and arts spaces don't necessarily realize that no matter how they present to the people that use them, they create change. Whether I personally think it's fortunate. I think it's fortunate that that spaces create change, whether they're intentionally creating change or not. Just the act of holding open the door is enough work that I think it deserves the title of work, and creating change. Do you see your efforts that way, or is it a conscious effort to not create activism but to create space?
I know I'll let Danielle answer after, but for me personally, everything you said is true, and I wouldn't do this work if it wasn't true. I mean, I have inside me a need to change the world as it is. The world is broken, and I want it to look differently. And so helping people be less alone, helping people feel welcome where they weren't welcome before, helping people have their, basic emotional needs met so they can then go out in the world and make change. I mean, all of that feels essential to my own personal mission. And I think to the way that I run Tribe 12, and I think it's evident to at least the staff and board. but I have to do it in a way that's going to be responsive to the needs of constituents. And so if the constituents were more geared towards activism, I would be excited to do that too. But I want to meet people where they're at and make change in a way that's going to be effective, which is partially why if someone does bring a debate, it's mostly my job to listen, at least in the moment. And that happens again, not I think on the types of things you were discussing, but on other things. And when we do get mirrored in debates of how to respond to the world, and the emotional toll of that is hard, but it's also part of the work.
Mhm. Yeah, to respond to what you were saying, James, I think there's an important concept in Judaism, like the concept of Jewish joy, and that's sort of a multifaceted concept rooted in like Jewish tradition and history. But the idea is that sometimes joy itself and experiencing the world and experiencing life can be an act of defiance against what's going on, and so we like to lift up those moments of Jewish joy for that reason. And the other thing I'll say is that I think that one way that we do that is by normalizing things that, like you said, may be up for debate in other spaces. So an example is that we're like a very queer normative organization. I can speak to my matchmaking work. It's inclusive of people who are trans, polyamorous, kink affirming, for people who are asexual. I mean, all across the spectrum. And so that's one way that we sort of, in our own little defiant way, say these are things that are not just accepted in our community, not even just welcome, but invited.
How do we avoid, as community spaces, as platforms, um the just for transparency, we were talking pre-show about political, the necessity for your organization to be apolitical because it's a nonprofit organization. There's lots of arts organizations that are also facing this as well, especially with the current administration's crackdown on DEI, and even up to and including grant applications not being able to mention race or gender or certain keywords, even because they're just throwing these things through filters that aren't very intelligent filters. They're just general filters on things like the word gay, causing the pictures of the Enola Gay to be deleted from history. How do we avoid being political? How do you, as an organization, hold that neutral space with things that feel to you as though they're accepted parts of your community, normalized in your community, but to the outside world might seem political?
I, Danielle and I sort of, I think, started this off a little differently. Like, I think we can't actually avoid being political because everything is political. Like, living is a political act. We avoid being partisan to some degree in the sense that we don't, we're not going to stand up and tell people who to vote for, even if maybe sometimes we want to. And we're not going to, but the restrictions on 501c3s are actually much, much narrower than people assume.
Yeah.
You can actually do a lot of advocacy under the 501c3. So for me, it's less about that. And it's more about, we are trying to cast a broad tent of who is welcome in our community. And, actually in young Jewish communities, those folks who are more politically on the right might feel more ostracized than folks who are more on the left in other ways. And so I want to make sure that someone who maybe has vastly different politics than my own feel like I can still be their rabbi. I can still care for them, and that person can still go to Danielle for matchmaking, which they do. I mean, we've got real political diversity in our matchmaking program, even though it is simultaneously affirming of all those things Danielle mentioned. And so I think we spend a lot of time thinking about, if we do this, who's going to feel like we are not a home for them anymore. And the more we can minimize that, we can't always minimize it. but the more we can minimize it, the better. And it's hard. It's not always easy. I think, especially the last few months as a staff, we've talked about this a lot and we've struggled with it.
Danielle, did you have something?
Yeah, I completely agree with Megan's definition of us as a big tent and this idea that everyone is welcome. The line in the sand is, usually that you don't need to be tolerant of someone else's intolerance, right? If
Sure.
there's something that someone's doing or saying that's harmful, then of course that's where we're going to draw the line. Other than that, I think that we take an approach that unity is the most important thing amongst our community. There's a lot of Jewish history that tells us that Jews have been persecuted and attacked just for being Jewish. And in those situations, nobody asked those Jews about the nuances of their opinions on anything. They just, came for the Jews. So we see unity as one of the big goals. And as much as we can find a way to agree on, or at least speak constructively about, that's the dream.
Are there any programs in specific coming up that you wanted to highlight? Any things that you think are most valuable to your community, to people who maybe want to know more about Tribe 12? Things that would introduce how your organization works to them?
I wish there was an easy answer to that question to say, oh, this is the one program to come to. But the truth is that we are trying to serve so many needs. And so every week we probably have 5 to 7 ways to connect to our community. So mostly what I recommend someone do is go to our website and look at our calendar and say, what actually speaks to me and where am I going to find the people who are going to really be my community, where am I going to find friendships? And then I recommend sticking with it. And so we have tribes that allow you to find a community of folks with similar identities or similar interests. We currently have a Dungeons and Dragons tribe running. We have book clubs. I personally recommend the classes because they're educationally, I think, really enriching, and you get to be with the same people for somewhere between 5 and 7, maybe 8 sessions, and really form deep connections. I think our Shabbat dinners are really wonderful, but again, I think it's about finding somewhere that you think is going to work for you.
Danielle?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll underline our tribe programming. I think the idea of coming together around a shared interest or affinity is really powerful. And those are usually smaller groups, like between 12 to 20 folks. And what's cool about them is that you'll see regulars, you'll see some of the same people every month, but you'll also see new faces every time. So we have tribes for all different little niches. Like Megan said, I'll mention that we have one like a monthly music circle. We have one that does arts and crafts. We have a run club. So it's really fun and a great way to meet new people.
Awesome. So I wanted to talk about some other things going on as I highlighted at the top of the show. I wanted to, like your organization, other organizations in the city, I think are responding kind of admirably quickly to changes in the administration, changes in national politics, changes in local politics. I wanted to talk about the Day Project. Eugene Park and Dolce are founding a holistic support for LGBTQ plus youth, and as a nonprofit. Do you feel like organizations like the Day Project, like your organization, do you feel it's a burden of having to pick up where, so personally, I think that a lot of organizations are responding right now because there is a loss of support, a loss of institutional support for a lot of things that communities actually need support for. Do you feel that as a burden, or do you feel like you're just you're coming into a space where, hey, all of a sudden I can expand in this way?
I think we don't receive any government funding,
Mm-hmm.
and most Jewish nonprofits don't. That's not really, I mean, the Jewish nonprofits that are hurting right now are the ones that are social service agencies, the ones, the Jewish organizations like Highest that do work for immigrants and refugees, the organizations that like Jewish Child and Family Services that are working on, poverty. Those organizations are really hurting. Our money has always been private donations mostly and grants from foundations, and so it hasn't impacted our work in that way. I think projects like the Day Project, it's devastating that individuals have to step up and do things that the government has historically done and should do. But the nonprofit sector is really vibrant and I think prepared in many ways for the moment. And we'll in any way that we can make sure that folks don't fall through the cracks during this time, like that's what we're here to do.
Yeah, I think that arts and nonprofit organizations definitely have always filled in that way. I do find it interesting, that so we've talked a lot on this show about nonprofit funding and fundraising, because almost all arts organizations in Philly are nonprofits of some flavor or another. And there's a difference, there's a divergent difference between certain founders and executives about the funding scene. So like there's funders that see the funding available to nonprofits and nonprofit arts, especially as a kind of a single pot, like a non malleable pot of money from which everybody draws. And there's others, me included, who think of it as a rising tide lifts all boats sort of scenario where, the more people are participating in these things, the more funding there is because there's more interest in it. There's more people understanding that these things exist. I don't know where you guys come down on around that, but what would be the ideal to see in funding, in support from the general society, versus what do you see as the picture right now? Like what I have a picture of what's going on in my head. I don't know if you guys think similarly. Where do you see your organization going forward in the next year or two?
Danielle, do you want me to start this one?
Yeah, I think this is your wheelhouse, Megan.
Yeah. So, I mean, I agree with you in general, James, that a rising tide lifts all boats, or however the expression goes, and that when it comes to folks with tremendous wealth, the ones who are really funding philanthropy in serious ways, and I think wealth inequality is what funds our philanthropic complex, and that has real pros and cons. We're very blessed that I think all the donors we work with at Tribe 12 are people who are not trying to put their own, they're not trying to pressure us in any way, which I really appreciate. And so I think those folks have enough to go around, and everybody else should be giving more. I mean, the Judaism encourages us to be tithing, to giving 10% of our income, and I think more and more people. I'm always shocked when I hear, I think the percentage of wealth most people give away is so tiny. Having said that, if my major donor came to me and said, I was going to give you $50,000, but I only have that to give, and I want to give that right now to, healthcare for folks whose healthcare has been taken away, or I want to give that for housing. And again, I think that's unlikely to happen. I think that's a real challenge because, as the main fundraiser, I get that. And if I had that limited money to give, I might also choose to move it from what we do, which I think is deeply, deeply, deeply important, and can be a matter of life and death. But there are other things happening in the world that are definitely a matter of life and death. And so I have to assume with the amount of money that's being cut by the government and the number of people losing jobs, there are going to be hard decisions that have to be made, and they may trickle down to us, and they'll definitely trickle to some of my colleagues. Um, and that's I mean, we're impacted by the world, and I'm okay with that. I guess is the right way to say it. Like I'm not, I'm not mad that I'm mad about the world, but I'm not mad that it might trickle down to impact nonprofits, if it's because people are meeting basic needs that aren't being met by the government.
Mm. And I'll add that programmatically, we have one of our programs is an accelerator for entrepreneurs in the Jewish community. And some of those entrepreneurs start businesses, some start nonprofits, and some are community projects. And the modalities, part of the curriculum that we teach them is about these big questions about how to navigate things like donations and grants and philanthropy and what our responsibility is to the world through that. So these big questions are covered too in that program.
Yeah. Yeah, I find it interesting that like this is all moving from models of society helping itself to mutual aid, the actual people impacted helping each other, versus kind of the showy politics of philanthropy that have existed. And I also wonder where the breaking point is, though, where the social contract that we've built breaks down. We had this debate before, with the New Deal, and with politics in the past, in the 1920s and 1930s, we entered the space where you're talking about, where there's such a vast wealth gap. There's such a vast difference between the top of the economy and the bottom of the economy, and there's no middle left. And where does that breaking point happen, and how does it get reset? Does it get reset? These are all interesting questions to me. I think that's something that people people really need to start examining for themselves. I don't think that unfortunately, I don't think people are going to have the luxury of just getting along as they used to. Um, in regional politics, that I wanted to talk about Kathy Hochul. She's the governor of New York. For those that don't know, there's a budget bill that's past its deadline. Its deadline was yesterday. And Kathy is holding the budget hostage, so to speak, because she's trying to shoehorn in changes to two things, which she calls reforms, which are, for lack of a better, actually counter reforms. They push changes to the discovery law in New York. So discovery is when you have a court case, both sides are supposed to be privy to all the information necessary to argue the case. And in criminal cases, that means that the prosecution has to give all the evidence and things that they're going to use in the prosecution to the defense. The discovery law was changed recently in New York. It was written such that all things associated with the case would be presented in discovery, and the change being demanded by kind of the law and order types in government is that they want the law to read things that are relevant. But then you get into questions of what is relevant, what is relevance to a case, what is relevant to your need to defend against it. there's that one, and then there's the expanded involuntary commitment that she wants to enshrine in law. Essentially, involuntary commitment is when you declare somebody insane and they're involuntarily held at a mental health care facility. Um, the interesting thing here to me is that these are all things that would even maybe 6 months ago be a Republican talking point, but Kathy Hochul is a Democrat. All of New York is Democratic. These again are in it's interesting that they're being dressed up in a Democrat label, as if there's a way to um, involuntarily commit somebody that's correct, or would is in some sort of way not subject to the abuse of power. Um, these things, are debates. They're being held as debates, but I don't know that they're necessarily debatable. National news, similarly, foreign aid reform. It's being framed as reform. We're talking about reform, talking about Doge, supposedly finding waste, fraud, and abuse. I personally haven't seen any waste, fraud, and abuse evidence by any of the things that Doge has published that it's done. And we can get deep into the many things that Doge has mispublished. But why are we forming these things as reform, when it's just it's seemingly just following an imprint that was laid down by, for lack of a less accurate term, white nationalist movements. We had people publish their intent to make these ideological escalations, under the guise and self-admitted guise of reform. And now we're lending credence to these things as debates on reform. Um, how do we get away from that? I'm not necessarily sure. I think that the local efforts like you guys, is possibly one way to get away from that. When you have uh, folks that are mutual aid, that are in the community affected by the decisions that are being made, that are affected by the quote unquote debate. Um, I think that's helpful. I think that I mean, and you can feel free to agree or disagree. Do you find it helpful that there's these things, these outside pressures being brought to your community, and therefore you can be a space where these things can be commented on by your community directly, and not held out as some mythical debate between good and evil, or held out as a debate amongst politicians and heads of state.
I mean, I can speak to some of the things that we hear from our constituents, right? Which is that I do think that there is a feeling from people of feeling a little bit politically homeless, right? That like people that maybe used to consider themselves squarely on one side of the aisle now feel conflicted in different aspects about like what's actually going on, and are internally wrestling and sometimes publicly wrestling with those kind of things. And the other thing that's affecting our constituents on a daily basis is fears about things like their jobs, right? We have a lot of constituents who work for the government and they wonder every day if that's going to change. These aren't things that people were worried about just a few months ago. So I guess what we experience in our daily life with our work is just like watching people be affected by things that feel like big news headlines, but are actually things that are affecting our real lives. Um, and all we can offer is, number one, a space to dialogue about these things and to feel heard and validated. And the other thing is, some micro solutions. Something that we have implemented is like a sliding scale for our programming, right? Where people can pay what they wish or pay at different levels. And part of that does involve also a pay it forward option or an at cost option for people who can afford more, right? So trying to create a space that is accessible for people of all socioeconomic backgrounds and also people for whom their livelihood might change on any day, on a day-to-day basis.
Do you find that these things have, you mentioned people that feel politically homeless. Do you find that people are suddenly realizing something about the people that they felt empowered by, or do you find them just breaking with what they, is it a matter of they're breaking with what they imagined the people were representing, or is it that they're finding things now to be different than what they thought they were representing?
Definitely both. So, one of the parts of my job is to have pretty intense, like 1 hour long conversations with people to get to know them. And in those conversations, we have enough time and space to get into the nuance of how people are feeling about the political climate and how people are feeling about things happening abroad, things happening within the Jewish community, anti-Semitism. So I've seen both things happen where people are reckoning with things that they had as long held beliefs and people that are simply just noticing that they have different viewpoints than they've had before, or are finding themselves aligned with people that they don't want to be aligned with on one thing but are on another. It's all of the above.
From a rabbinical perspective, I would think that a lot of your viewpoints are well examined. You probably have a pretty clear picture of how people are approaching things, even from the outset. It's probably one of your skills. What would you say that you have noticed a shift in the people that come to you? Like, is it that they thought that the people that they were talking to represented something and they didn't, or is it that they are finding a shift in themselves, in their beliefs?
You're asking me now?
Yeah, yeah.
I agree with everything Danielle said. I think some folks, their beliefs have changed. The everything that's happened, especially the last year and a half. And then since the election inauguration, I think a lot of folks just feel a lack of trust in the political system. And I think I was talking actually not to one of our constituents, but to an older and like someone who's more of a stakeholder about like there's a lot of folks who worked really, really hard leading up to the election and sort of feel like they have no idea what to do right now. My sense is actually our constituents are mostly just trying to put their head down and survive. Like I just taught a class called More Than Treading Water because of like how can you find life, meaningful and joyful right now. And it encouraged folks to think about hope and to think about how they can have an impact on the world. But I think a lot of folks feel so overwhelmed by trying to think about having an impact on the world that they just shut down. I want to go back though to from a rabbinical perspective to the other comment you asked earlier, one of them about do I feel like it's good that there's so much, I'm not good, but like, is the fact that there's so much brokenness around us and people need us a good thing? And I don't think you were saying it exactly like that, but that's how I heard the question. And I often, say like, my work is never not going to be needed. Like the world is so broken that like, whatever's going to happen with climate change, like people are always going to need spiritual caregivers to navigate what's ahead. And I find that I could be I think I will always be employable because of that. And I wish I wish that wasn't the case. I wish that there was, none of our folks were worried about losing their jobs. None of our folks were worried about poverty. None of our folks were struggling. I still think we'd probably be needed in some ways, but I will never see it as a blessing that we're needed. I think it's I feel really devastated by the world right now in so many different ways. And I wish that our people didn't have to be living through this. And not
I
just our people, all of them.
Yeah, I don't know that I would call it a blessing so much as yeah, it reminds me of the backwards Southern compliment. It's nice. I often operate in the space of emergency. When people call me, it's because something has gone wrong. Um, and it's nice to be needed. But at the same time, I don't want to be needed. I definitely everything I do is to avoid being needed, but I do often operate in that space of emergency. Um, and I think a lot of what I was getting at is it's interesting that a lot of nonprofits are having to step up into this space, into really finding a way to care for communities being abandoned um, by the political machine, by society. Government is more than just laws and taxes. It is a social contract. The ideal is that it takes care of everyone. Again, this is one of those things being presented as a debate that I don't think is really debatable. I think that in reality there is no substitute for, like, you'll get anarchists who say, the society will organize itself. I don't think it does. I think it organizes itself in the governments. And unfortunately or fortunately, but those governments need to service the people, and service all their needs. And without that, why would those governments exist? They're not just here to collect taxes. Um, we do have 2 minutes left. I do wanted to talk about global climate change dialogue. We're facing a rise in sea level. I've actually done work to document the rise in sea level as it affects Philadelphia. We're in a tidal waters, and with the change in administration, we now, with the first major climate summit of 2025, 40 nations showed up to talk about what's not happening. And the U.S. just, the representatives from the U.S. seemingly blockaded with slogans and, a dialogue about what is reality, arguing there's no there. How do we, I don't think small organizations like ours can affect global climate change, from more than, I recycle. My house has solar on it. What more do we do? How do we push this back into the realm of reality as individuals? Does it matter to your community? Is it something that's on their radar?
Yeah, we hear people speak about topics like climate justice all the time and different, everyone has their sort of activist issue. I'll say that one thing that we love to do as an organization is actually tell people about other organizations. So in the Jewish community, there's a great organization called Dayenu, which is the Jewish response to climate change, climate justice organization. So that's an example of where we would say to somebody, look, you're passionate about this, please get involved with this great partner organization of ours.
Yeah, we ran a conversation with Dainu last April, I think was the program, or last May. And they have a really phenomenal sort of taking a spiritual, psychological approach to have you have a conversation with your ancestors and with the future generations. And I think I've been saying for a while, I think one of the biggest, again, of my rabbinate of my life is sort of supporting people through the fact that the world as we know it is changing, and it is worth it to try to fight it in small ways and big. But I'm not sure I believe we're going to be able to, reverse sort of the course where things are headed. And so it's more about how do we minimize the impact on marginalized folks and be prepared to take care of each other. And that this is partially why I think cutting foreign aid right now is such a devastation, because climate refugees, all of this. And so yeah, it's another thing that makes me feel very worried.
Yeah, yeah. Any last thoughts? It is 11:01, and I wanted to get you out on time. So any last thoughts? Anything else you wanted to highlight? We'll start with Danielle.
Thank you. We appreciate you having us on, and anyone who's interested in getting involved is welcome to visit tribe12.org.
And Megan.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to meet you, and I learned a lot from hearing sort of the ways that you're thinking about the world, and grateful to be in conversation.
Thanks so much. Thanks for joining me. I'm gonna go to a one up on me. Feel free to drop off. I welcome you back on the show anytime. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And thank you to you guys for joining us this week, as every week. Really appreciate your continued viewership. If you like what you've seen, if you feel like you have something to share, if you feel like any of this spoke to you or your concerns, please share it. Hit the like button on the broadcast you're watching. Subscribe to us on the channel that you're viewing us on. We're on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Blue Sky, and Live Push directly. The problems around climate change, problems around foreign aid, problems around even just talking about removing reforms to criminal justice. These all affect our society in large ways. Even just holding the space open to discuss them is, in and of itself, a huge movement and a huge effort to counter the negatives that can come with some of these things. I'm really glad we got to speak with Tribe 12 today. Excuse me. Next week, we'll be talking with SPQR Stage Company, Bill Starrett, and we'll be talking about local news and events and the arts as usual. I really appreciate you watching. As I said, I wanted to get into a few things that we didn't really have time for, but I think overall we need to respond to the problems that are being presented by the Christofascism, the drive for editing the world into what people of a certain ilk think it should be. There's space for everyone to live in reality, but there's not space for everybody to have their own reality. And it's an effort that is valuable to establish what the real world is, and to make sure that everybody is on the same playing field. Yeah. As the quote said that we started with, um, white supremacy benefits all white people, including the ones with no torches. That's why it survives. And we make no mistake, we are battling white supremacy, we're battling Christofascism. And there, as I've said in editorial, there is an active civil war. We may not like it, we may not name it every day, we may not be fighting on lines, front lines with, regiments and armies, but there is an active civil war that is taking the lives and livelihoods and freedoms of people. Yeah, it's going to escalate before it gets fixed. And it's really something important to think about and to participate in. And I know many people just want to get along, and have a good day and go home. Sooner or later, your own ability to do that will be affected. And it's just where we are right now. I don't want to bring that as bad news. It's not a blessing, but it is a point of fact. And the more we acknowledge reality, the more we acknowledge fact, and the more we try to make sure that everybody is taken care of, the better off we'll be. With that, I hope you enjoy the rest of your week, everybody. Tune in next week. We'll have another great show for you. And coming up soon, we're going to be talking to Breaking Bread Community Shelter as well, which I really look forward to. So yeah, enjoy the rest of your week, everybody. See you next Wednesday.